Hi there. You're probably here because you want to get a real handle on the mutual fund world, right? You want the key trends, what's actually shifting, but without, drowning in data.
Exactly. Think of this as your curated view.
We're diving into the mutual fund industry dashboard from March 2025 today. It pulls together data from global sources like ICI and India's AMFI.
It's a pretty comprehensive snapshot covering both global and Indian trends.
And our mission, really, is just to pull out the most important insights, give you a clear picture of where things stand.
Yep. We've gone through it, looked at global asset growth, investor behavior,
Right.
both overseas and right here in India, trying to make sense of it all.
Okay, let's kick off with the global view then. It's kind of hard to miss how dominant the Americas are, asset-wise.
That really stands out from the ICI data, yeah, looking at late 2024, early 2025 figures. But if we zoom in a bit, the U.S. growth story is particularly interesting.
Oh, definitely. U.S. mutual fund assets. They've more than doubled over the last decade.
Right, something like an 8% compound annual growth rate.
Which is pretty steady growth year on year on average. We had a visual on that, showing the climb from 2014 right up to March 2025.
And you can see the different fund types contributing: mutual funds, ETFs, those traditional closed-ended ones.
It really suggests, I think, a mix of decent market performance and maybe just more Americans getting comfortable with mutual funds as a way to invest.
Makes sense. And if you look at where that money is going within the U.S. market, equity is king, about 60% of assets.
60%, and that breaks down further.
Yeah, 48% in U.S. stocks, 12% in international equities. Then you've got bond funds and money market funds, roughly 18% each.
Okay, and the last 5%.
Hybrid and other types of funds.
Now, this next point, I find this really fascinating. The huge shift towards passive investing in the U.S. It feels like a major change.
It absolutely is. The numbers are stark. Go back to 2015, passive funds, index funds, ETFs that just track an index.
Right, not trying to beat the market, just match it.
Exactly. They were only 34% of the market then.
And now, March 2025.
It's jumped to 69%. More than doubled.
Wow. So active management managers picking stocks, trying to outperform, that's now the minority share.
Precisely. A massive swing towards just tracking the market.
Okay, quite a shift. Let's bring it home now, focus on India. The dashboard gives us that March 2025 snapshot, and some numbers really leap out. All-time highs, right?
Several of them, yeah. Industry assets under management, the total AUM, is sitting at Rs 65.74 lakh crore.
Huge number. And SAP flows.
Monthly SIP flows, systematic investment plans, hit a record Rs 25,926 crore.
25, nearly 26,000 crore every month.
Yeah. And remember, SIPs are just those regular fixed investments, super popular. Passive AUM is now 17% of the total here.
Okay, 17% passive. And investor accounts.
Also records. Total SIP accounts crossed 10 crore, 10.05 crore to be exact. And unique investor accounts are at 5.42 crore.
And the total value locked up in SIPs, the SAP AUM.
Also a high Rs 13.35 lakh crore.
It's interesting, too, seeing this split. Individuals hold the majority.
Yep, 60% of AUM is with individual investors. Institutions hold the other 40%.
And the direct route, investing straight with the fund house.
That accounts for 47% of AUM, direct AUM share.
And one more point that caught my eye, mutual funds versus bank deposits. That gap seems to be closing.
Well, the ratio is definitely growing. Mutual fund AUM is now about 29% of total bank deposits. That suggests maybe, people are seeing potentially better returns or are just more aware of mutual funds now.
Okay, so strong headline numbers. What about the growth trends year on year in India?
Pretty robust. Overall industry AUM grew 23.1% compared to the previous year.
23%. Solid. Is that it across the board?
Pretty much. Both equity-oriented and fixed income-oriented funds saw that same 23.1% growth.
And the money actually flowing into equity funds, net flows.
Over the last 12 months, more than doubled compared to the year before that. Big jump.
We're also seeing more new funds launching, NFOs.
Yeah, aggregate new fund offers are up quite a bit.
But passive stayed steady. You said 17%.
That's right. The passive AUM percentage of total AUM held steady at 17%.
Okay. And just for context, where was the market? Sensex, GSEC yields.
Sure. March 2025, the BSE Sensex was around 77,415. That's up about 5.1% year on year.
And the 10-year government bond yield.
6.58% gives you that sort of risk-free benchmark.
Right. And we're seeing more people actually investing, unique accounts growing.
Definitely. Significant growth in unique investor accounts and also in that total SIP AUM we mentioned.
The monthly amount coming in via SACP, the gross sales, that's up too.
Oh, yeah, up by 35%. And the total number of SIP accounts also climbed.
I did see that data point on discontinued SIPs, though. What's the story there?
Well, yeah, the dashboard shows the number of discontinued SIPs and that figure as a percentage of total registered SIPs.
So while new ones are starting, some are stopping. Any idea why? Profit booking? Changing plans?
The report doesn't specify why, but yeah, it could be various things, people hitting goals, rebalancing, maybe market timing. It shows investor behavior isn't static.
True, but the overall trend for SIP inflows is still strongly up.
Absolutely. Aggregate SIP flows over the last 12 months are way up. And the 5-year average annual growth rate, the CAGR for SIP AUM, is a very healthy 41%.
41% CAGR on SIP AUM. Impressive. And you mentioned mutual funds gaining on bank deposits. That's a longer-term trend.
Oh, yes. The dashboard had a great chart showing this ratio MFAUM to bank deposits climbing steadily over the past decade. It hit that 29.1% in March 2025, really shows a shift in where people are putting their savings.
And geographically, are investments still concentrated in the big cities? T30 versus B30?
The overall split between the top 30 cities, T30, and beyond the top 30, B30, is relatively stable, but the growth rate over the last 5 years has been stronger in the B30 cities. The CAGR is higher there.
Ah, so mutual funds are penetrating deeper beyond the major metros. Seems that way, yeah. Reaching a wider audience. And the speed of growth overall, the time taken to add the next chunk of AUM.
It's accelerating. The timeline in the report shows it's taking less and less time to hit each new INR 5 lakh crore milestone in total industry AUM. Quite dramatic, actually.
Okay, let's dig into the asset classes themselves within the Indian industry. Equity still leading the charge.
Very much so. And its share is actually increasing. As of March 2020, total mutual fund assets in India.
Over 61%. And there's a chart showing that trend.
Yep, a stacked area chart. It tracks liquid overnight, debt, equity, and hybrid AUM from back in December 2014 right up to March 2025. You can visually see equity taking up more space over time.
Clear trend. Now, what about the investors themselves? Participation levels.
Records again. Total investor count hit 5.42 crore in March 2025.
5.4 crore unique investors.
And a lot of new inviters came in, both in March and over the whole year leading up to it.
There's a graph for that too, isn't there? Tracking total investors and new ones added each month.
Right, from March 23 to March 25 shows a clear upward slope.
And the SAP flow numbers again.
Yeah.
Just staggering. Doubling in less than 3 years.
Pretty much. Reaching that Rs 25,926 crore monthly figure in March 25. There's another chart, a stepped line graph, that marks the milestones when it crossed 15K crore, 20K crore, etc. since late 2022. Really shows the acceleration.
Is the average SIP amount going up too? Average ticket size?
Yes, it saw an increase in March 2025. Suggests people are putting a bit more in each installment on average. There's a bar graph showing that trend since DEX 19.
And we already said equity's share of total AUM is growing.
Correct. That's a clear trend over time.
What about the equity AUM that comes specifically from SIPs? Is that share growing too?
It's edged up slightly. There's a dual axis chart showing SIP AUM as a percentage of total equity AUM plotted alongside the Sensex.
Interesting to see how it relates to market movements.
Yeah. And overall buying of equity funds, the gross sales, that's been trending up since April 2023.
Okay. And SIPs are becoming a bigger part of those gross sales.
Increasingly so, especially since June 2024. The combined chart shows SIP flows forming a larger chunk of the total equity gross sales bar over time.
And the net flow into equity funds after redemptions, still positive.
Remarkably so. 49 consecutive months of positive net equity sales as of March 2025.
That's over 4 years straight. Incredible consistency.
It is. There's a chart showing gross sales, net sales in the Sensex since March 21. Really highlights that sustained positive sentiment.
Even if you exclude SIPs and NFO money, net equity sales are still positive.
Yes. The trend line for net sales, ex-SIPs and NFOs, has also been in positive territory since March 21, suggests a broad appetite for equity.
And NFOs, the new fund launches, heavily skewed towards equity.
Massively. Equity funds grabbed 97% of all the money raised through NFOs in the last year.
97%.
Yeah. The bar graph comparing equity and debt NFO flows next to the Nifty 50 makes that very clear.
One last point on participation.
Yeah.
The DII versus SII dynamic, domestic versus foreign investors.
Right. We're seeing a pattern where domestic institutional investors, which includes mutual funds, are showing net inflows.
Buying more than selling.
Exactly. While foreign portfolio investors, FPIs, have recorded net outflows over the same recent period.
So domestic institutions seem more bullish than foreign ones lately.
That's one interpretation, yeah. The chart comparing DII, FII flows and the Sensex shows this divergence pretty clearly.
Okay, interesting dynamic. Let's talk about passive investing in India now. You mentioned it's 17% of AUM. Is that growing significantly like in the U.S.?
It is growing, definitely. Maybe not as explosive as the U.S. yet, but the trend is clear. Passive AUM share went from 10% in March 2021 to that 17% in March 2025.
So steady growth. There's a chart for that.
A dual-axis one showing the passive AUM growth and its rising share.
And how does passive break down across asset classes? Like how much of equity AUM is passive versus debt?
The report splits it out. For March 25 versus 24, you can see the passive component within domestic equity, debt, and international funds.
Anything stand out?
Well, international funds have a really high passive share, 59% in March 2025. A lot of overseas investing is happening via passive routes, it seems.
And within the overall passive category, what's the biggest slice?
Domestic equity passives. They make up about 72% of all passive AUM in March 2025. The pie charts show that clearly.
And can we break that down further, like passive equity into index funds versus ETFs?
Yes, the dashboard does that. It shows the AUM split for domestic equity passive between index funds and ETFs for both March 25 and 24.
Same for debt passives.
Yep. Debt passives are broken down into target maturity index funds, other debt index funds, and debt ETFs.
Some international passives.
Similarly detailed. International index funds, ETFs, and fund of funds investing overseas, all compared for March 25 and 24.
So lots of detail there. Are more people actually opening accounts for passive funds, folios?
Oh, yes. Big growth in passive fund folios over the last 5 years. The stacked bar chart showing folio counts across different scheme types makes that increase very visible. More investors are clearly embracing passive options.
Okay. Beyond passive, any other notable trends in the dashboard?
Well, the growth in global funds, AUM funds investing outside India is pretty impressive over the last 10 years.
Even with regulatory limits in place sometimes.
Yeah, despite those, the line chart splitting it into global fund of funds and global ETFs index funds shows consistent expansion. Indians seem keen on geographic diversification.
Makes sense. Within equity categories, which ones saw the most action, sales-wise?
Sectoral and thematic funds, they had the highest gross sales and net sales over the last 12 months among all equity types.
But all equity categories were positive in March 25.
Yes, that's right. All showed positive net sales. The table provides all the detailed numbers, sales, redemptions, net sales, AUM for each equity category.
But debt was negative in March.
Correct. Debt categories overall saw net outflows in March 2025.
Likely because of the financial year-end, you think?
That's what the report suggests, yeah.
Yeah.
Tax planning, portfolio adjustments by corporates and individuals. The table for debt categories shows the details.
How about hybrid funds? Any standouts there?
Arbitrage funds. They had the highest gross and net sales among hybrids over the last year. Again, the table has the specifics.
Okay. And there are tables for solution-oriented funds and others too.
Yep, showing net sales for things like retirement funds, children's funds, and miscellaneous categories as well.
We touched on geography earlier with B30 growth. Is the share of smaller cities definitely rising?
Yes. The trend of mutual funds moving beyond the absolute top-tier cities like the top 15 is clear. The share of AUM from the next 15 cities, B15, is increasing. The stacked area chart shows the contribution from Mumbai, Delhi, the next 13, and other cities changing over time.
Reinforces that B30 growth point.
Exactly. And the line chart comparing T30 and B30 AUM growth directly shows B30 catching up or growing faster recently.
Which states are leading, besides Maharashtra? Any fast growers?
Maharashtra still has the largest AUM share, but the table highlights Telangana and Haryana as having the highest growth rates over the past year. Shows some regional shifts, perhaps.
Interesting. What about who owns what? Individuals versus institutions across different fund types.
There's a stacked bar chart showing that breakdown, and pie charts that illustrate how different investor categories, individual, institutional, allocate their money across equity, debt, hybrid, overseas funds, and overall.
And you mentioned individual investor AUM growth outpacing the industry.
Yeah, quite significantly over the last decade. The dual axis chart comparing individual AUM growth YoY versus industry AUM growth YoY really drives that home.
Do individuals and institutions invest differently? Asset mix.
Very much so. The pie charts showing their respective asset compositions are quite different, reflects different goals and risk tolerance, most likely.
Okay, nearly there.
Yeah.
What about direct versus distributor channels?
The dashboard breaks that down, too. Stacked bars show the direct versus distributor split across asset types. Pie charts show the overall asset composition for each channel.
And who uses which channel? Is direct mostly individuals?
Increasingly, yes. The breakdown of direct versus distributor AUM by investor type shows a growing share of direct AUM is held by individual investors.
One final trend. Market share among AMCs. Is it concentrating or spreading out?
It seems to be spreading slightly. The market share of AMCs beyond the top 10 players has been steadily growing over the last few years, as shown in the stacked line chart.
Okay, that's a lot of ground covered. Before we wrap up, that important reminder.
Absolutely. Standard, but crucial. Mutual fund investments carry market risks. Always read the scheme documents, the SID, KIM, offer documents carefully before investing, understand what you're getting into.
Essential advice. Okay, so let's try and summarize the big picture from this March 2025 dashboard.
Well, the Indian mutual fund industry is clearly on a strong growth path.
Driven a lot by individual investors, especially using SIPs.
Right. Equity is the dominant and growing asset class. Passive investing is making steady inroads.
And the reach is expanding, moving beyond just the biggest cities. Plus, individuals are becoming a more powerful force.
That sums it up pretty well. It's a dynamic landscape. This data gives us a really valuable snapshot.
It does. Which leaves us with a thought for everyone listening. Given how popular mutual funds are becoming and how investors seem to be getting more knowledgeable, what role do you see mutual funds playing in your financial future? Or maybe thinking about that passive trend.
Yeah, the US versus India comparison.
Exactly. What factors do you think will really determine how big passive investing gets here in India? Definitely something to chew on.
Food for thought, for sure.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mutual fund data.
My pleasure.